Today I want to talk about world building. I'm working on a speculative fiction novel at the moment, which obviously requires quite a bit of world building. But initially, I just wrote it. I didn't really think about the world of the story. And only when I realised that the story wasn't working did I go to world building. Which suggests, of course, that world building is incredibly important in any story that you are writing. To varying degrees, of course. In my case, it really helped me get a better idea of how the characters would act, and also some scenes that I could add in to give weight to these characters, and more. Let me explain. So most people know what world building is. World building is the art of creating fictional worlds, and can be applied not only to novels and short stories, but also to tabletop RPGs such as Dungeons and Dragons, and film and television. Really, any piece of imaginative fiction can have world building in it. It's moved to podcasts now, even with podcasts like Welcome to Night Vale being a particularly prominent example of this. I urge you to check that podcast out if you're interested, of course. I would even argue that stories set within the real world and based on laws by which we live can have world building. The reason that I say this is that the real art of world building lies not only in building a world, but building one that challenges your characters in the most effective way, and that reflects their values and biases. For a concrete example, take the film Citizen Kane. The story world built by director and co-writer Orson Welles reflects the loneliness of the titular character, Charles Foster Kane, particularly in the subsetting of Xanadu, which is Kane's mansion, his estate, which is shown to be opulent but empty. It's almost too large. And it's a place that Kane resides in alone. He has no friends, his wife has left him by the end of the film, and he dies there alone. And there are many, many examples of this within Citizen Kane. Everything is reflecting Kane's psyche, his weaknesses, his longing for his childhood. This is just one example, Xanadu. It is a physical manifestation of the consequences of his major flaws. His drive to have everyone love him, which ends with him being loved by no one. And then an example from my own story that I was just talking about. My main character is a rules-driven, uptight military man. And admittedly, this is a common type, a common trope in sci-fi and fantasy and so on. But I was struggling to come up with a reason why this might be, which, let's face it, is what is going to make someone unique. Their reasons, their psychology. Then, as I did some world building, I found that there existed a highly addictive drug in my world, and that my hero's brother had died as a result of an addiction to this drug, which had caused a certain amount of uptightness in my character, an avoidance of these sort of substances, and to rules and routine. I also realised that the world in which my character lived was a horribly prejudiced place, and a place that was largely controlled by military interests, and my character being a military man, this created a sort of conflict within him. Deep down, my character knew these things to be wrong, but he ignored his feelings out of fear because the military was what he knew, it was his life. And this caused him to be even more rigid and avoidant. So my characters were made deeper by the relationship with the world around them. This is true of us here in the real world as well. and thus putting it into your story allows for the creation of stories with texture and nuance. It allows you also to come up with characters that can push against, like, see the world in a different way and can push against your main character. For example, in my story, I have a character that refuses to ignore the prejudices of the world and pushes my main character to see those. So that's another way they interact with the world in a different way. It's not going to be realistic. A character is not going to be realistic if they don't have some opinion about the world around them, if they don't have some way of interacting with the world around them. So I want to give some brief suggestions for world building. Should tie aspects of the world to your character and their flaws. Make sure that the aspects of the world you choose to emphasize reflect a flaw in the character or push them towards facing and transcending that flaw. Ideally, you should do both. This will create character movement, like an arc in your character, rather than simply having them stuck there. Though occasionally that is what you want. And case in point is Citizen Kane, as we've seen before. Kane was stuck in his ways, ended up losing everything, and even though the world of the film constantly showed us, the audience, that Kane himself did not see it in the world around him, and his story was ultimately a tragic one. But if you want to create change in your character, then you can use the world to reflect that. Have the world show them somehow what they've done wrong. You can use it to structure your narrative. And there are various ways to do this, which are quite complicated and would take probably too long to explain here. I'll give some suggestions of where you can look if you want more information on that. So, but to do this, just briefly, think about what problems your character has, even better, write them down, and figure out how you might represent this visually, or how you might bring them into contact with this flaw in some physical way, whether that's through a character, or a setting, or an event that happens in the story outside of the character's control. It might also be prudent to focus on the most important elements of the world rather than trying to know everything. Though everyone has their different methods, so choose what works for you, of course. But if your story is going to deal heavily with prejudices of some kind, as mine is, or perhaps with religion or any theme of this nature, think about how this particular aspect of society works in your world. Really focus on this aspect. And then you can think about anything that might be related to this aspect of your world. So think religion, for example. How do the religious institutions interact with the governing body, for example? Is there collusion between them or tension? Are they separated or closely related? These are the sort of questions you can ask yourself. And they help build up sort of a web of interconnected subworlds and institutions within the world. That's probably my two suggestions. I'm by no means an expert in world building, so to learn more, a few suggestions. As usual, I suggest that when reading your favourite books, look at how the world interacts with the characters and vice versa, and what choices the author has made in crafting the world of the story. Look at how the world reflects what the characters are going through, how it forces them to face their flaws and change, or how it ends with them not changing, and how that's reflected. For more guidance or analysis, however, I recommend you check out Brandon Sanderson's lectures on world building, which are part of his 12-lecture series on fantasy writing taught at Brigham Young University. This whole series is available on YouTube, and well worth watching. Sanderson, in the 2 world-building videos, he talks about different methods and philosophies of world building, and how much authors should know and how much we should reveal to readers, and goes through some techniques for how we can build our own worlds. I'll link the whole series down below in the description. You can see probably more... You can see in the titles which videos deal with world building. Also worth reading is the chapter on Story World by John Truby in his book Anatomy of Story. Apologies, I have mentioned this book in other videos, but it's a really very good book and a really invaluable resource for learning more about storytelling. I will say Truby makes some absolute pronouncements about storytelling, which I don't think are always true. They can certainly be bent or even broken, or have certain variations, or be done in subtler ways that you would need to kind of look at stories and really understand them for a long time to really get. I've tried analysing stories with his techniques, and sometimes I've come up stuck. But still, there are some good general rules and guidelines in the book that apply to most great stories. And the chapter on Story World, I think, is particularly applicable. So check that out. And it's a good starting point, because most of what he talks about is applied in some way, whether it's subtle or slightly varied. So that's John Truby's The Anatomy of Story. Just Google it. Yeah, so check that out. So that's really all I had to say on world building. As usual, please like, subscribe, and share the video. That would be amazing. The support would mean so much. And support the channel. Get these teachings out there. Well, teachings, guidance, discussion. I wouldn't call myself an expert on any of this. If you have any like corrections, disagreements, agreements, ideas, thoughts, please comment down below. I'd love to discuss this with you more, because I think we can both learn from getting a discussion going. And share this video with anyone that you think would benefit, this channel with anyone that you think would benefit. Subscribe for more content. I try and post every Monday, but that sort of depends on, it's going to sort of depend on schedule now. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. The links will be down there. Join my writing group, the Writers Network, down below. I'm quite active on Reddit as well. The writing groups on there. So you can follow, you can have a look there as well. I might be lurking around. And check out my website, ishanmorrisgraywrites.wordpress.com. The link will also be down there in the description. So until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.